Breaking Bad, a world where brains and brutality collide, where surviving, let alone thriving, means mastering the art of war, science, and psychology. Over 5 unforgettable seasons, we've seen criminals rise and fall, geniuses outsmart death, monsters disguise themselves as men. Today, we're diving deep into that world, not just to celebrate its characters, but to rank them. From the street-level players to the empire builders, this is the definitive tier list for Breaking Bad characters, based on 2 deadly metrics: intelligence, the ability to outthink, outplan, and outmaneuver, and dangerousness, the willingness and skill to eliminate obstacles by any means necessary. Let's get into it. Starting off with tier 5, the lowest tier. This group are people who are mostly normal people you'd see IRL, but can also have above average intelligence as well. Starting with Jane, this goth is sort of sneaky by blackmailing Walter into giving up Jesse's half of the money, threatening to tell everyone Walter is Heisenberg. But that's not particularly impressive. She's pretty harmless and never intended to physically harm anyone. Next is Badger, who the only reason I'm including him here is that he once had a fight with Jesse where he did decently well considering Jesse also won a fight against Walter twice. He also possesses a bowgun, which, is better than nothing. However, he's average or below average intelligence, pretty much just a normal dude. Overall, harmless. Next is Gale, who is a genius when it comes to chemistry and probably lots of science-related stuff, but has never shown to be a tactician or clever liar by any means. Unlike Walter, Gale would never hurt a fly. Next is tier 4, where we start to get to real criminals who are dangerous by our real-life standards. Starting with Hector Salamanca. I know you're wondering how an old guy in a wheelchair is more dangerous than Jane, Badger, and Gale, but an important factor in what makes someone dangerous is their connections or resources. In this case, Hector can call up and summon characters in higher tiers to his bidding, like Tuco and the twins, to help him in whatever he needs. He's evil and ruthless and also has an impressive amount of willpower due to him willing to sacrifice himself to take out Gus Fring. However, he would never do something like that normally and only has this much will because Gus murdered his whole family and was bragging and torturing him. So this super willpower was situational. So pretty much above average intelligence since he used to run a drug business and is physically harmless. However, he's more of a summoner who can manifest some of the most dangerous characters in the verse. I guess next is Crazy 8, who is pretty much a random goon drug dealer man whose best feat is almost manipulating Walter into letting him go and then killing him with a sharp shard from a plate. However, he knows how to use a gun and is willing to use it if he felt like he was in danger. Average intelligence, but not harmless. Getting to Victor, one of Gus's main guys, he's not terribly impressive by any means and probably got to his position because of sheer loyalty. He somewhat knew how to make meth from watching Walter and Jesse, but obviously push comes to shove would not have made a project as good as Walter, Jesse, or Gale. At best, given the benefit of the doubt, Victor would have been better than Todd or Declan's cook. Also was dumb enough to actually show his face to the people who were at the crime scene of Gale's death and wasn't worried about it, leading to Gus needing to get rid of him, showing his rashness and probable impulsivity. So overall, he's at the level of your typical serial killer, but seems to have a temper that spawns mistakes. Todd, on the surface, seems like a polite, well-mannered guy, but underneath is a stone-cold sociopath. Todd doesn't show much intelligence or long-term vision, but he's decently dangerous because of his unpredictability and lack of empathy. The smartest feat he has, in my opinion, is realizing that keeping Jesse alive could prove useful for him and Jack's gang, which ended up being true because it led to them getting rid of the videotape where Jesse snitched on Todd. Also, it led to the gang forcing Jesse to cook for them. That being said, he has no talent for cooking meth and almost burned down a lab trying to cook by himself. He's pretty much a dog who is to be led around by either Jack, Walter, or Lydia. I would argue he seemed to be the one leading the crew when they threatened Skylar and her baby despite the police being across the street from the house, implying Todd knows how to sneak past cops, which is pretty impressive. So overall, takes the initiative, decent lethality, but average intelligence. Your typical serial killer, but without Victor's anger nerf. What nerfs Todd more is the part of him that isn't so selfish. Like when he convinced Jack to let Walter keep some of the money and probably stopped Jack from killing Walter outright, which led to his eventual death as he couldn't see Walter would obviously come back to kill him and his crew. So maybe he does have some emotions, but that sense of respect killed him. Tyrus is Gus's main personal henchman, even above Victor I believe, due to the scenes in Better Call Saul. Probably more calm and collected than Victor, and wouldn't have made the error of showing his face at Gale's place. Nor would he have tried to cook without Gus telling him to. He had the foresight to know killing Hector himself would have been best, as opposed to Gus going in person. Pretty much better Victor, just a bit older and probably slower. I imagine he's probably more reliable than Todd, but you can switch them around. Again, typical serial killer, but no emotional nerfs as far as we saw. Getting on to tier 3, where we start to see some more arguable geniuses or goons that are extra dangerous. First is Jesse Pinkman. He's surprisingly creative with his ideas by season 5 and is able to see through most of Walter's manipulation tactics. However, doesn't fully overcome them by the finale. He's the one that came up with the magnet and train ideas. Is able to almost see through Walter's plan with Brock's poisoning, accurately deducing it was Saul who had Huel take the cigarette from him. However, instead of concluding this was a plan to frame Gus, Jesse mistakenly thought Walter was simply just trying to make him suffer, failing to see the full picture, the grand end goal. But maybe can by the end? Hard to say. He knew it was likely Neil Candy was gonna try and kill him and get the rest of the money back if he returned, but not for a fact. So he came up with a plan of hiding a pistol in his jacket pocket to trick Neil and give himself the advantage of prep. Something not too far off from what Mike might have done, being crafty and not leaving things up to chance or RNG. That being said, I believe Jesse is lucky in the sense that it's a mechanic or trait in the series that only latches to a few characters in the verse. While Jesse did suffer quite a lot, and those tragic things that happened to him could be seen as unlucky if anything, I believe he has the luck in a more survivalist sense. In the pilot, he just so happens to not get raided by the DEA because he was with a woman at that exact moment. Tuco could have easily killed Jesse when Tuco clobbered him. Before Tuco's death, Jesse just so happened to find a rock in the sand so he could use it and hit Tuco in the head. He's lucky Walter just so happened to see the news about the killing of Thomas, which made Walter go and save Jesse from the two gangsters. He's lucky there was loud music playing when Mike was calling Gale to warn him about Jesse coming to kill him. When Gaff sniped that one dude's brains out, that could have easily been Jesse instead. Right after the death of Eladio, instead of Mike getting shot, it could have easily been Jesse once again. In season 5, when Jack is about to execute Jesse, Todd comes in to save him and keep him alive. There's probably more examples, and I know there's times when luck screws him over, but when it comes to life or death situations, fate seems to be on Jesse's side, which I think is so powerful that it somehow convinced the writers to not kill Jesse towards the end of season 1 when that was the original plan. Most likely because of the writers' strike that occurred during the time they were filming season 1, which makes Jesse's luck meta and transcended even. However, getting to its weaknesses, Jesse is a drug addict who, when under extreme stress and mental turmoil, will relapse back into meth, though probably to hype himself up enough to murder people or burn down their house. Not very educated on most academic subjects above high school level, however Walter believes he's a prodigy in business and can teach a college level course to other students. Sure, Walter was probably just gassing him up to encourage Jesse to go to college, but nonetheless, Jesse should have on the field knowledge most students wouldn't have. Also is extremely concerned for children's safety, which makes him impulsive to making decisions on how to optimally fix the situation without making it worse. For example, Thomas, it can be argued the best thing to do was to go speak to Gus about it first, who had the power to make the gangsters stop using the kid. While it's unknown if leaving the other kid on the dirt bike alone was objectively the right decision due to the risk of him telling people what occurred with the train robbery, it's worth noting Walter had his concerns about such a risk, though we're not sure what Mike thought. However, when it came to how to react to the situation, meaning figuring out what to do with Todd, both Walter and Mike knew it was best to keep him on the payroll to avoid the risk of Todd retaliating in some way, which Jesse couldn't see or was too angry to acknowledge that firing Todd was probably the wrong decision long-term wise. So overall, Jesse seemed dumb at first, but had lots of potential, which he had reached more or less by El Camino, making him pretty dangerous and clever by the end, having learned from everyone around him. Second is Gaff, who is the main emissary in the cartel's New Mexico territory, serving as the primary enforcer, hitman, and right-hand man of the cartel. He's one of Eladio's A players, who's a very skilled sniper and most likely skilled with other firearms. Is probably the one who thought of the plan to use the gas from the truck to choke out Gus's men inside the truck. He's basically Eladio's version of Mike, but far inferior and less experienced, but probably had potential to be Mike's level. He's impressively smart for sure and pretty deadly, someone who even endgame Jesse can't take out and only Mike himself could handle. Third is Saul Goodman, who's a fantastic lawyer. Maybe as Jimmy some were better, but as Saul Goodman is unmatched due to his criminal and underhanded tactics. While most of his best feats are in his respective show, in Breaking Bad we see that he's still excellent and is able to keep Walter out of trouble when he blows up a car, for example. Most of what makes Saul dangerous is his connections and the people he knows. For example, a master hacker who could hack thousands of computers around the world into delivering Walter's money to his son's website. The other obvious and most useful connection is Mike himself, who is his personal PI, who he himself knows Gus Fring. Saul also apparently knows hitmen for whenever he might need one for whatever reason. As unhinged Walter might have been by season 5, it was actually Saul suggesting for Walter to kill Hank when Hank found out who Heisenberg was. Also suggesting the same thing for Jesse, which Walter also shot down. Saul's weakness is being too greedy and not knowing that working with Walter was a bad idea despite Mike warning him. He also doesn't take the initiative and is prone to being intimidated, like how he was forced to work for Walter when we know Saul could have just hired a hitman to kill Walter if he really wanted to. Overall is a fearful person, thinking Gus would actually kill him just for associating with Walter. So overall, Saul's intelligence is unquestionable. He's clever, resourceful, and endlessly adaptable, but in terms of being lethal is not really his thing despite his potential. He facilitates crime but doesn't execute it. He survives by talking, not by shooting. Still, his role in enabling Walter's empire can't be ignored. A law and crime genius, but non-lethal. Lastly, for this tier is Lydia. She's similar to Saul in which she's smart, kinda harmless herself, but has dangerous connections she could use. She's a business genius working at the manufacturing and shipping conglomerate Magical Electromotive, is essentially in charge of 46,000 employees spread across 14 divisions. Moves things from point A to point B all over the globe, 1.2 million metric tons a month. All of it right at her fingertips. A laptop click away. She's also very careful with who she works with as opposed to Walter, similar to Gus, though without the intelligence of Gus. She's also very paranoid, which works to her advantage, avoiding lots of risks. She knows how to contact hitmen, just like Saul as well, hiring one to kill Mike, though that may only be because that person worked for Gus, so we don't know if she knows like outside hitmen from like outside of Mike's network. Is overall very sneaky, getting Todd and Jack's crew to kill off Declan's crew, then planning on getting Walt killed at Jack's hideout. So overall is really smart and dangerous, even according to Mike, but needs goons in order for her lethalness to activate. I rank her above Saul because she's more evil and ruthless than Saul. Even if Saul is more clever than Lydia, he's not willing to go to extreme lengths as much as her. Moving on to tier 2, where we finally get people with either extraordinary resources, supreme skills, or straight up superhumans. First up is Declan. He has a pretty big gang out in the desert, is decently smart for figuring out that there was a whole third of the methamphetamine that Mike wasn't selling him. Besides that, he at least is intelligent enough to not get caught by the police while running a crew and making meth, which most people can't do. It took Lydia tricking him to take him and his gang down at the hands of Jack's crew. While Walter made a very good argument and proposition for Declan to work with him, Declan didn't have the foresight to see working with Walter was not a good idea like Mike. However, even Gus fell for a very similar argument Walter gave to him when they first met. Though I will say the situation was more complicated because Gale was actively vouching for Walter. Here, Declan probably should have just killed Walter in the desert, but perhaps fate was on Walter's side. Who knows? Overall, Mike would need a couple of guards with him, probably if Gus, for example, wanted Declan's crew to be taken out. Second is Jack. He controls a gang who is heavily armed to the teeth and has bulletproof vests. They're much stronger than Declan's crew since it looks like they didn't even lose a single guy or got hurt, pretty much no-diffing them in a couple of minutes. He is decently smart, able to control a gang of psychopaths and not get caught for his illegal activities. He's smart enough to know Hank would never give up, but yet is dumb enough to actually think Walter wouldn't come back for revenge once he let him live. Also wasn't as careful as Gus, like how when Gus did a background check on Walter and found out his brother-in-law worked for the DEA. Jack just said screw it and worked with whoever as long as they had cash. I suppose Todd vouched for Walter in the first place, but nonetheless Jack should have done his research. Also, his pride made him not see how Walter was trying to buy time so Walter could just kill him and his crew. Nonetheless, I don't blame him for not seeing how Walter was gonna kill him since a gun in the car is extremely unforeseeable and they were pretty cautious with him in the first place. Overall, average or above average intelligence and has one of the more dangerous factions in the verse at his disposal who could all make the cops look like idiots. Pretty much takes a top tier character just to take him out. Third is Tuco, who, since he's a Salamanca, he naturally has a high power level in this verse, being treated as a boss like in a video game. He's in charge of a small drug operation with very few guys, but he moves a lot of money nonetheless. While seemingly just a crazy maniac, we should remember running a drug operation and not getting caught for it ever until Walter showed up is pretty impressive. He seems to have an ability where he could read people whenever they're doing deals, like when he's trying to read Crazy 8. Overall though, he's unstable, aggressive, dangerous, but not that smart. Tuco's strength is his raw violence. He's unpredictable, yes, but also sloppy and impulsive. You don't really last long in this world, being all brawn and no brain for the most part. So high in lethalness, average intelligence, which makes him stop here in the rankings. Otherwise, if he wasn't a drug addict, maybe he could have been a bigger player in the world. He probably would have killed Hank if he didn't just get hit in the head with a rock and gotten shot in the torso and was high on meth. So 3 severe nerfs at the same time. So yeah, unless a Salamanca is in a wheelchair, you don't want to mess with them. Next up is Bolsa, who is pretty much the second-hand man of Eladio. He's a mediator between Eladio and the other capos of the cartel, using his talking and reasoning skills to keep the peace between the Salamancas and Gus. His intelligence is most likely above someone like Tuco or Declan, as Bolsa is essentially at the heart of the cartel and oversees many things about it. A much bigger operation compared to whatever Tuco or Declan got going on. He is also the first person in the cartel to detect Gus was up to something and had the initiative to go over to the US and kill Gus, but it was already too late by the time he caught on. Also obviously has lots of men at his disposal, though they weren't good enough to handle Gus's kill squad. So overall, a political player in a dangerous world, but wasn't nearly as intelligent as Gus, despite Bolsa seemingly being pretty sneaky himself. The reason he's so high as it is his connections to the cartel itself. With proper permission from Eladio, could have the entire cartel at his disposal if, for example, he wanted to kill Gus. Lionel and Marco Salamanca, better known as the twins, are those double bosses like Ornstein and Schmo, or like the twin ships from Assassin's Creed Black Flag. They're silent, relentless, and deadly soldiers who are like a 2-man army. Similar to Saul, their best feats are in the prequel, so they're actually not as imposing in Breaking Bad. Even if I don't include the feat of them taking on an entire gang by themselves, there's still the narrative that they are Salamanca and therefore dangerous. The people they kill when they are introduced are just citizens, nothing to gloat about. The only thing that's impressive is how they're almost never caught by the police. Even the one cop that found them was ambushed and off-guarded by them. The cousins are terrifying in their physicality and devotion, in theory. In reality, they failed to kill Hank despite the dude not even having a gun, while they both did, while also having bulletproof vests. In the end, they did win the battle and decided to let their pride take over, which made them want to kill Hank with an axe instead. However, I will say that there's a factor in this battle that pretty much made them lose, so I'm gonna give them a pass. After all, Vince Gilligan said that they were created to be silent badasses.
Skull-tipped boots that the cousins are wearing. And he suddenly realizes that they are very serious, real badass members of the cartel.
That being said, they once again can call up other Salamancas to help, not to mention other cartel members. So they're top tier in terms of direct physical violence without backup, only behind like probably 2 guys. Then with backup, they're even better. Overall, their placement seems fine considering how overpowered the guys above them are. Next is Hank Schrader. He's a smart, relentless, and persistent detective with good instincts. He's pretty much the only detective in the verse who could have solved the Heisenberg case from what we know, besides maybe Mike if he was still in the force or something. Some people call Hank dumb for not detecting that his own brother-in-law was Heisenberg, but that's unfair because people usually conflate their own omniscient POV with how they would react if they were in Hank's position. Which in fact, most people would not consider Walter due to Hank's particular perspective of Walter, which is that he seems like a harmless old man with no spine who would never commit a single crime besides buying some mere weed. While yes, someone like L from Death Note would think about every single detail of the entire case with his superior superhuman brain, basically Hank is nerfed by his assumptions about Walter's character. Anyway, Hank pretty much cracked the entire Gus Fring case and most likely would have fully solved it without Gus dying, assuming Gus didn't kill him of course. He is also a very good brawler who could fight multiple guys at once, similar to Mike, something we don't see as much in this franchise, aside from Tuco's fighting style. Also, it's pretty impressive with a pistol, managing to defeat Tuco and being able to hold off Jack's crew for longer than 5 seconds with a pistol, with his only backup being Gomez, is pretty notable. That being said, I think one of Hank's best attributes or traits is his luck. Yes, that's right. Hank also shares this mechanic. It is profound that he managed to kill Tuco despite the maniac using a much better gun at critical range. It's lucky even if you take the Tuco nerfs into account. Also, there's when Hank had to take a breather next to a car and by accident avoided the explosion that killed and injured several cops. Then there's the moment when he pretty much lost to the twins, but somehow a bullet just so happened to fall out of their pocket right next to Hank, which led to Hank just barely winning in the end. Another example was the WW initials in Gale's notebook could be argued as very lucky for Hank considering it was the thing that finally made him connect the dots in season 5. Not to mention finding the Leaves of Grass book in Walter's bathroom was also very lucky as well. Jesse later on just so happened to be having drama with Walter at the same time Hank is trying to put Walter in jail, which led to them working together. Anyway, you can see my point here. There's a lot of good RNG for Hank. Similar to Jesse, I'm aware you can argue him and Hank are also unlucky, yes. That the reason Hank is in the dangerous positions he's in is because of Walter, just like Jesse. I get it, but I'm arguing that the good luck activates when he's close to death, or when it's needed for the plot to move forward. Imagine an entity that is controlling fate in the verse, moving it in such a way that the characters will suffer but ultimately not die. Except in Hank's case, the entity controlling fate favored Walter no matter how much he may have liked Hank. Therefore, Hank couldn't be saved. So overall, Hank is very smart and very dangerous, but his luck gives him an edge that is almost unmatched. Lastly, in this tier is Mike. He's cool under pressure, methodical, and experienced in dirty work. Is probably the wisest character in the verse, having been in the Vietnam War and been a police officer for many years. Not to mention many missions he did off screen between Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. Can take down an entire squad of armed men by himself with some prep, however. You know, the balloons. Believes he, with a squad of his own, can hit the cartel, but probably didn't mean to take them down entirely. In general, is very strong for someone his age and is able to take down men in their prime, but is unable to solo a group of them. However, he was drunk when they took him down, so it's hard to say if the group of guys would win against a sober Mike. Is also very creative, but not as out of the box as Jesse. Is very skilled with almost every gun similar to a main character in Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, or Resident Evil. Is also just in general a detective who knows the ins and outs of police and the way they operate. Most likely knows at least somewhat about how the military might work due to him knowing how they'd react if they tried robbing a train. He considered the ability to throw off multiple police tails on him to be basic. Is also immune to Walter's manipulation, though not Gus's manipulation when he convinced Mike to work for him in the name of revenge. Is able to teach Gus a thing or two, telling him not to use fear as a motivator, which Gus learns his lesson and avoids doing that against Walter when trying to convince Walter to work for him. Usually Mike says not to do a half measure, but does a half measure by not killing Lydia and working with Walter, who he knew from the start was a ticking bomb. However, this was to get enough money to pay off his guys in prison to stop them from snitching on Mike, Walter, Jesse, and Lydia. However, one can argue not killing these guys like Lydia wanted was a half measure in itself, which had Mike did that, he would never need to work with Walter and eventually die. Sure, he wouldn't get any money for his granddaughter, but at least he'll be alive. Also, he made the mistake of letting that hack lawyer take care of his money instead of trusting Saul. Probably the simplest error we ever see him make, which is bizarre considering how good Saul is at his job is infinitely more trustworthy. I understand the random lawyer was already representing all the guys in prison, but Mike should have just had the foresight to simply switch the guy out for Saul. Also, the most obvious weakness being that Mike is old and doesn't do much physical movement and walks in all of his missions, relying on his skills, wisdom, and creativity to avoid physical exertion. So overall, I think Mike could solo the twins with prep and could also win in a fight against a lucky Hank, even if Hank doesn't die. I believe Mike would simply escape at worst. Mike is just smarter and more skilled than anyone on this tier or below. Even strength is debatable when comparing him to Hank or Tuco, which is crazy. He's just not a mastermind, however, which leads to the next tier. In the final tier, we have the most intelligent and lethal characters. The masterminds who have the best stats and could outplay anyone on this list given the right prep. Starting with the king of contradictions, Walter White, the main character of the series. A once meek chemistry teacher turned ruthless meth kingpin. Walter is easily one of the most intelligent characters in the series. At first, it's mostly his science trait that gives him a unique edge compared to the other criminals who make drug dealing their whole personality. However, by season 5, Walt develops his manipulation skills to the point he could manipulate a pretty advanced Jesse who knows of Walter's tricks, using Jesse to give himself an advantage against Gus Fring. Walter gets by not only using his intelligence and science trait, but has the ability to kind of wield people and situations to his bidding to make up for most of his shortcomings. Jesse being a prime example of a person he wields as a tool against his enemies. He acts in such a way that makes people overlook or underestimate him, making them not take him as seriously as they should and see his potential danger. Jesse seems to think he is good with interrogation when they captured Lydia. Skyler considered Walter's skill for thinking of solutions to his problems to be magic, despite Vince Gilligan calling Skyler a smart woman.
The character Anna Gunn plays is not a dumb person.
Hank considered Walter to be the smartest person he ever met, despite meeting Gus and knowing of Gus's operations in and out. Then going into more detail on his science skill, Walter is a master chemist who even makes Gale look like a freshman in college. Walt knew how to make fulminated mercury to surprise Tuco with an explosion. Like, that's great. No other character in the series is doing that. Then he made the ricin poison against Tuco, Gus, and Lydia. He knew how to make a bomb with simple ingredients you can get at the store. He even knows some engineering when he made a contraption that could take down Jack's entire crew. His dangerousness, though, lies not just in the violence he commands, but in the way his emotions command him. He killed Mike just because Mike called him out on his pride, which made Walt lose all reason. He killed his drug dealers to save Jesse, which perma-aggroed Gus. While of course those drug dealers deserve to die more than Jesse, it nonetheless was objectively an emotional decision that made Walter's life a living hell for all of season 4. Pretty much guaranteeing that eventually he'll need to face off with Gus. Also, there's the decision to not let Hank get killed by Gus, which made things even worse with Gus, when things would have been smoother had Hank simply died. In season 5, again, even Saul advises Walter to kill Hank, but Walter refuses due to whatever was left of his morality, deciding to play the maximum difficulty game of not killing Hank, and instead forcing Hank into submission with the confession tape. So basically Walter gets his cake and eats it too. My point is that this emotional impulsivity or irrationality actually makes Walt unpredictable to the point even Mike couldn't foresee his death. It pretty much took the dangerous, clever, and lucky combo of Jesse and Hank just to take down Walter. But even then, Walter could have simply made Jack's crew come and kill Hank and Jesse, but he chose to give up anyway. He also has pretty good perception, being able to detect the missing shard of a plate Crazy 8 took just from a glance at the garbage. Later, he also just barely glances at someone's shopping cart for a brief second and somehow knows immediately that the person is planning to make meth. As for more general intelligence, Walter was able to figure out Gus's game with Jesse, deducing that Gus's plan was to drive a wedge between Walter and his tool. Was able to outplay Hank with some law knowledge when Hank was trying to break into the RV, then later coming up with the plan to use a phone call to get rid of Hank so they have enough time to destroy the RV. Came up with quick responses in the argument against Skyler about keeping the kids in the house to the point Skyler is forced just to wait for the cancer to kill Walter. His lying ability becomes pretty good, using the Ted affair as an explanation for Skyler's panic attack to get Marie off his back. Lastly, probably his best trait is his amazing luck that even surpasses Jesse and Hank's, probably combined. In one conversation, Walter and Jesse talked about how the RV could have broken down at any time and how they got lucky no cop ever caught them whenever they ran out of gas or something. You can argue Walter is lucky that Saul took such an interest in Walter, despite Mike telling Saul to leave Walter alone, which leads to Saul being the only reason Walter doesn't end up in jail or dead. When the twins are at his house, Mike just so happens to be there at that exact moment, which led to Mike calling Gus and Gus texting the twins to leave Walter alone. Then there's Gus deducing he shouldn't walk towards a car that he left alone. This whole Brock poisoning situation raising red flags in his mind, but yet isn't smart enough to figure out Walter poisoned Brock despite there being possibly no one left. Now it's possible Gus did figure it out and that's why he sent some goons to Walter's house. But again, Walter is lucky Mike wasn't there in that whole situation to begin with. Mike just so happens to get shot and left in Mexico when it's time for the battle between Gus and Walt. Had Mike been there, Walter would have died instantly. Also by accident he flips over Jane, which leads to him deciding to let her die. Had he not flipped her over, Walter would have never intentionally killed her and thus Jesse would have probably died within a week from overdose. Walter is also lucky that Todd respected him so much that he convinced Jack to let Walter keep some of the money, which is the only reason Walter was able to escape with the vacuum man. Not to mention, Walter wanted to go to jail after learning Hank was working with Jesse, but yet his luck wouldn't accept that and goes against Walter, making Jack's crew come anyway to his rescue. Then in the finale, Walter is lucky the Nazis let him park his car in the exact right place for the plan with the M60 to go right. Had they simply been more strict about where to park it, the whole thing falls apart and Walter would have made the gun contraption for no reason. Then lastly, Jesse could have killed him, but fate made it so Jesse learns his lesson about not getting manipulated by Walter and thus lets Walter die from his own hands. Even when Walter wants to die, the entity of fate I mentioned earlier doesn't want someone else to seal the deal, protecting Walter to the very end, as Jesse could have easily been so emotional that he just shot Walter without thinking it through first. You can argue some of the examples here are actually unlucky because it makes Walter suffer more instead of death, but either way, what I'm focusing on is survival. Walter is lucky in that sense. So overall, thanks to a mix of Walter's top tier intelligence, his science trait, manipulation, and luck, he was able to defeat all his enemies. At the end of the day, even Jesse said that Walter is the devil and he's smarter and luckier than Hank, someone who is very smart and lucky in his own right. What nerfs Walter, however, is his pride, ego, emotional outburst, and impulsivity that makes him sacrifice his own safety to protect his family and Jesse. Then is Gus Fring. He is most likely the smartest character in the verse. What makes Gus Fring's rise in Breaking Bad so impressive is the sheer complexity, control, and the duality of the operation he builds, all while maintaining a public image that is almost perfect. He builds a state-of-the-art underground meth lab, an unheard of move in the verse. He owns and operates Los Pollos Hermanos, a successful fast food chain, which he uses as a front for his drug operations. He uses logistics and distribution networks through Los Pollos Hermanos to efficiently and discreetly move his product. Even Mike at first confuses Gus for a simple drug dealer, but Lydia corrects him and says Gus is much more than that. Most criminals struggle to hide their tracks, but Gus thrives in both realms, fooling the DEA his employees, and even the cartel with his true intentions. He is a strategic master, probably learning his skills as a leader when he was in Chile. Better Call Saul implying he was in the military in some way. He groomed his best friend Max into being a meth cook, later doing the same thing to Gail and then manipulating Jesse to work for him. Gus is also an unmatched emotional manipulator, tricking Walter into meeting with him again by buying meth from Jesse Pinkman. He's able to see the ego in Walter's core being despite at the time only meeting him 2 times, understanding Walter White more than even his own wife. He eventually convinces Walter to work for him by appealing to his pride, having to do with being a man and a provider. Later, he invites Walter to his house, putting children's toys around his home to make it look like he is a family man, to appeal to Walter more, the point of the dinner being to try and convince Walter to stop working with Jesse. Ironically, Gus later played a game with Walter where his plan was to manipulate Jesse into being on his side, eventually hoping Jesse would turn on Walter or at least let him die by Gus's hand. He's able to see through the attempt on his life when Walter tries to blow up his car by thinking about how it was strange that someone poisoned Brock, which leads to Gus coming to the hospital and leaving his car alone. While Gus may not have known there was a bomb, he suspected something was wrong and may have guessed Walter was trying to kill him since he's the only one he knew who could have poisoned Brock. Though if he thought this, he most likely would have told Jesse about it. Point is that he at least suspected someone was trying to kill him. Gus in season 4 wasn't just playing and beating Walter in a mental battle. He was also dealing with the cartel and Hank all at the same time. Gus was still this close to winning in the end if it wasn't for Mike being out of commission, severely nerfing Gus, most likely thanks to Walter's luck activating. His weakness is also pride, but to a lesser extent compared to Walter. We only see this pride when he goes against Tyrus' wishes and decides to kill Hector himself. His other weakness could have been love, but decided it would be best to avoid that altogether. Either to avoid making them a target for his enemies, or just purely is too obsessed with his revenge for the cartel and simply didn't have time for that. Either way, he's wise enough to avoid creating a weak spot. Overall, he's everything Walter wishes he was, building his own drug empire from scratch, unlike Walter, who basically needed the help of Mike for distribution and then simply taking and absorbing Declan's distribution. While Gus manipulates and uses people like Walter, Gus on top of that can still do stuff on his own while having much stronger antagonistic forces to deal with, like with the cartel. And lastly, he has none of Walter's luck as well, pretty much taking on the entire verse as a whole and only barely losing because of his own pride and hatred for Hector. Next is Don Eladio, the leader of the cartel. He is definitely the most dangerous person in the verse if you factor in all the resources. Pretty much an actual empire at his disposal. Probably has guys in the Mexican government and police like with the real life cartels. He can command all the Salamancas to do whatever he wants, along with his own soldiers as well. Definitely having the most impressive faction by far. He seems to have an ability where he can read when he's being manipulated, not being pleased with Gus when he manipulated Eladio into setting up a meeting. In Better Call Saul, Lalo warns Nacho that he must tell Eladio the truth and only the truth or else Nacho will end up dead. This implies not even someone as smart and charismatic as Lalo can successfully lie to the boss. Not that Eladio is a genius or anything, but that the cartel can fish out the truth and see if anything ever said to Eladio is a lie anyway. His cartel has so much intel that he's the only one that found out about Gus's past in Chile that even Hank or Mike couldn't find. Eladio also is able to detect hatred in Gus's eyes, though didn't think Gus would have the balls to act on that hatred and step up. Or at least he thought he was so powerful and untouchable that Gus wouldn't be successful if he made a move anyway. That being said, it's decently clear how Eladio got to where he is with his charm and also his abilities to detect lies and read people pretty well. In terms of individual power, he's obviously not much and has no feats of doing anything at all, just presented as some fat dude who commands other people to do everything for him. So overall, he's definitely above average in intelligence and has an extreme amount of resources, but is weak by himself. I believe it's reasonable to switch Walter, Gus, and Eladio for sure. They have different weaknesses that can be exploited, They all have many arguments for who is the most dangerous. For example, you can argue just because Lalo has the most resources doesn't mean he's smart enough to use them correctly or to their full potential like how Walter or Gus might. Now, that concludes the Breaking Bad characters. I'll be moving on to the Better Call Saul characters, which will contain spoilers. If you're clicking off here, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Bye-bye. This section is only going to have 3 characters because the rest I don't care to rank more mostly harmless people. First is Kim Wexler. I don't think she's nearly as dangerous as Saul and is pretty much harmless. I would say because of Kim's superior morality compared to Saul, she's probably around tier 5 with Jane. Is a tier 3 level genius, but push comes to shove, she won't go too far. Second is Nacho Varga. He's pretty clever, coming up with the pill plan to take out Hector, though didn't have the wisdom of Mike to know killing Tuco would have caused problems. With motivation from Gus threatening his father, Nacho had the will and tenacity to impress Lalo, mainly from collecting the meth before the DEA could get to it and taking up more responsibilities. As Mike said, he played a tough game and played it fairly without ratting on Gus to Lalo to become a triple agent or something. Also easily knew how to get inside Daniel Wormel's house and bypass his security, something I don't see even in-game Jesse doing. Nacho's best feat was figuring out Gus's plan to have him killed by the cartel and managed to get away from the twins and several other cartel men. He's around that endgame Jesse level of lethality, but I think slightly smarter, even if Jesse's more creative and out of the box. I think Nacho's intelligence is more useful and practical, while Jesse's more creative ideas need Walter and Mike just to make them useful, like with the magnet and train robbery ideas. Though I do think Nacho can't defeat Gaff, probably caps out around there. Lastly, the one I'm sure Better Call Saul fans have been waiting for, Lalo Salamanca. Out of every character in the verse, I believe he has the best overall stats, having on par intelligence with Gus and Walter, but probably only slightly inferior. However, he makes up that tiny gap with more gun skills, immense charisma, the ability to only need 1 or 2 hours of sleep every day, the superhuman ability to jump from a high place and land without any damage and climb through air vents in seconds. Has the ability to tell when meth is his or is from someone else. Lalo tried his best to destroy Gus's operations systematically. That way Gus won't make the cartel any money and eventually lead to the cartel not wanting Gus around any longer. He did this by taking advantage of a situation where one of his dealers got caught by the police. So he made the dealer snitch about drug deals in Gus's operations to the police so the dealer won't go to prison and also hit Gus at the same time. Lalo also planned to hit more of Gus's supply trucks, his restaurants, getting his customers sick, cutting off power, busting open pipes, pretty much chipping away at everything Gus has to make sure the Salamancas can rise again and take control. Was able to solo an entire team of hitmen that ambushed him and took him by surprise with just his wit and some prep with the bathroom tunnel. He also had the foresight to tell the surviving hitman to inform Gus that he was killed so that way Gus will lower his guard and allow him to come at Gus by surprise. Lalo actually had planned for something like this to fake his death eventually by getting someone to look like him and even go as far as to make the guy change his teeth and alter the guy's dental records to match Lalo's, thus tricking everyone in the verse that he died except Gus. After Hector told him to get proof, Lalo went as far as going to Germany just to find the former construction workers who made Gus's meth lab and get one of them to spill the beans on Gus's secret meth lab at the laundry. Even when he made the error of calling Hector and got caught on wiretaps, confirming to Gus and Mike that he was indeed alive, Lalo adapted to the situation and made it seem like he was going to Gus's house to kill him, to make sure his guards go there instead. As an added measure, when he sent Kim to go shoot Gus at his house, he not only knew Kim would fail, but that she would tell Mike that Lalo was at Saul's apartment, thus making Mike and Gus's men distracted enough for Lalo to go to the laundry and get the proof he needs that Gus is going against the cartel. Lalo probably would have won if it wasn't for 2 things. Hector confirming that Lalo was alive by smiling at Gus, leading to Gus putting wiretaps at Hector's care center, and then finally Gus got lucky against his shootout with Lalo that the creators confirmed was just luck. Anyway, Lalo's only weakness was feeling like he had to gloat about his victory to Gus, giving Gus the opportunity to kill him. Besides that, I don't see any weaknesses. The only reason he wasn't using his head when he was bloodlusted and was about to go kill Gus without proof was because Gus had just killed Lalo's family. Anyone in Lalo's position would get bloodlusted as well. It's not proof of a temper or anything. Lalo is very calm and patient usually. So overall, Lalo is the most dangerous individual without prep or goons, while Eladio is the most dangerous person in general thanks to his men and connections. Gus, in my opinion, is the overall smartest person. And lastly, Walter overall has the most useful traits like his science skill, luck, manipulation, and passive ability to make people underestimate him.